Using the Embedded Enterprise Bean Container. This chapter demonstrates how to use the Embedded Enterprise Bean Container to run Enterprise Bean applications in a Java SE environment, outside of a Java EE server. The following topics are addressed here. Overview of the Embedded Enterprise Bean Container, developing embeddable Enterprise Bean applications, the standalone example application. Overview of the Embedded Enterprise Bean Container. The Embedded Enterprise Bean Container is used to access Enterprise Bean components from client code executed in a Java SE environment. The container and the client code are executed within the same virtual machine. The Embedded Enterprise Bean Container is typically used for testing Enterprise Beans without having to deploy them to a server. Most of the services present in the Enterprise Bean Container in a Java EE server are available in the Embedded Enterprise Bean Container, including injection, container managed transactions, and security. Enterprise Bean components execute similarly in both embedded and Java EE environments, and therefore the same Enterprise Bean can be easily reused in both standalone and networked applications. Developing embeddable Enterprise Bean applications. All embeddable Enterprise Bean containers support the features listed in Table 26-1. Table 26-1 required Enterprise Bean features in the embeddable container: Enterprise Bean feature description, local session beans, local and no interface view, stateless, stateful, and singleton session beans. All method access is synchronous. Session beans must not be web service endpoints. Transactions container managed and bean managed transactions. Security declarative and programmatic security. Interceptors class level and method level interceptors for session beans. Deployment descriptor, the optional EJB-jar.xml deployment descriptor, with the same overriding rules for the Enterprise Bean container and Java EE servers. Container providers are allowed to support the full set of features in Enterprise Beans, but applications that use the embedded container will not be portable if they use Enterprise Bean features not listed in Table 26-1, such as the timer service, session beans as web service endpoints, or remote business interfaces. Running embedded applications. The embedded container, the Enterprise Bean components, and the client all are executed in the same virtual machine using the same class path. As a result, developers can run an application that uses the embedded container just like a typical Java SE application as follows: Java class path MySessionBean, jar, container provider runtime, jar, myClient.jar example. EJB client main. In the above example, MySessionBean jar is an EJB jar containing a local stateless session bean. Container provider runtime jar is a jar file supplied by the Enterprise Bean provider that contains the needed runtime classes for the embedded container, and myClient.jar is a jar file containing a Java SE application that calls the business methods in the session bean through the embedded container. Creating the Enterprise Bean container. The JAVAX EJB Embedded EJBContainer abstract class represents an instance of the Enterprise Bean container and includes factory methods for creating a container instance. The EJBContainer CreateEJBContainer method is used to create and initialize an embedded container instance. The following code snippet shows how to create an embedded container that is initialized with the container provider's default settings. EJBContainer EJBContainer CreateEJBContainer. By default, the embedded container will search the virtual machine class path for Enterprise Bean modules. Directories containing a META-INF EJB-jar XML deployment descriptor, directories containing a class file with one of the Enterprise Bean component annotations such as stateless or jar files containing an EJB-jar XML deployment descriptor or class file with an Enterprise Bean annotation. Any matching entries are considered Enterprise Bean modules within the same application. Once all the valid Enterprise Bean modules have been found in the class path, the container will begin initializing the modules. When the CreateEJBContainer method successfully returns, the client application can obtain references to the client view of any Enterprise Bean module found by the embedded container. An alternate version of the EJBContainer CreateEJBContainer method takes a map of properties and settings for customizing the embeddable container instance. Properties props equal new properties. Props. Set property. EJBContainer ec equal EJBContainer. CreateEJBContainer props. Explicitly specifying EJBContainer modules to be initialized. Developers can specify exactly which EJBContainer modules the embedded container will initialize. To explicitly specify the EJBContainer modules initialized by the embedded container, set the EJBContainer modules property. The modules may be located either in the virtual machine class path in which the embedded container and client code run, or alternately outside the virtual machine class path. To specify modules in the virtual machine class path, set EJBContainer modules to a string to specify a single module name, or a string array containing the module names. The embedded container searches the virtual machine class path for EJBContainer modules matching the specified names. Properties props equal new properties. Props. Set property EJBContainer modules, MySessionBean. EJBContainer ec equal EJBContainer, CreateEJBContainer props. To specify EJBContainer modules outside the virtual machine class path, set EJBContainer modules to a Java I/O file object or an array of file objects. Each file object refers to an EJB-jar file, or a directory containing an expanded EJB-jar. Properties props equal new properties. File EJB-jar file equal new file. Props. Set property EJBContainer modules, EJB-jar file. EJBContainer ec equal EJBContainer, CreateEJBContainer props. Looking up SessionBean references. To look up SessionBean references in an application using the embedded container, use an instance of EJBContainer to retrieve a JAVX. Naming. Context object. Call the EJBContainer getContext method to retrieve the context object. EJBContainer ec equal EJBContainer. CreateEJBContainer context ctx equal ec. getContext. References to SessionBeans can then be obtained using the portable JNDI syntax detailed in portable JNDI syntax. For example, to obtain a reference to MySessionBean, a local SessionBean with a no interface view, use the following code. MySessionBean MSB equal MySessionBean CTX. Look up Java. Global. MySessionBean. MySessionBean. Shutting down the EJBContainer container. From the client, call the close method of the instance of EJBContainer to shut down the embedded container. EJBContainer ec equal EJBContainer. CreateEJBContainer ec. Close. While clients are not required to shut down EJBContainer instances, doing so frees resources consumed by the embedded container. This is particularly important when the virtual machine under which the client application is running has a longer lifetime than the client application. The standalone example application. The standalone example application demonstrates how to create an instance of the embedded EJBContainer container in a junit test class and call a SessionBean business method. Testing the business methods of an EJBContainer in a unit test allows developers to exercise the business logic of an application separately from the other application layers, such as the presentation layer, and without having to deploy the application to a Java EA server. The standalone example has two main components: StandaloneBean, a stateless SessionBean, and StandaloneBeanTest, a junit test class that acts as a client to StandaloneBean using the embedded container. StandaloneBean is a simple SessionBean exposing a local, no-interface view with a single business method, return message, which returns greetings as a string. Stateless public class StandaloneBean private static final string message equal greetings. Public string return message. StandaloneBeanTest calls StandaloneBean return message and tests that the returned message is correct. First, an embedded container instance and initial context are created within the setup method, which is annotated with org.junit. Before to indicate that the method should be executed before the test methods. Before public void setup ec equal EJBContainer. CreateEJBContainer. ctx equal ec. Get context. The test return message method, annotated with org.junit. Test to indicate that the method includes a unit test, obtains a reference to StandaloneBean through the context instance, and calls StandaloneBean. Return message. The result is compared with the expected result using a unit assertion, assert equals. If the string returned from StandaloneBean return message is equal to greetings, the test passes. Test public void test return message throws exception logger. Info testing standalone. EJB. StandaloneBean. Return message. StandaloneBean instance equals StandaloneBean CTX. Lookup Java. Global. Classes. StandaloneBean. String exp result equal greetings. String result equal instance. Return message. Assert equals exp result. Finally, the teardown method, annotated with org.junit. After to indicate that the method should be executed after all the unit tests have run, closes the embedded container instance. After public void teardown if ec equal no ec. Close. Running the standalone example application. Before you begin, you must run the standalone example application within NetBeans IDE. From the File menu, choose Open Project. In the Open Project dialog, navigate to Tut Install. Examples. EJB. Select the standalone folder and click Open Project. In the Projects tab, right-click Standalone and select Test. This will execute the unit test class StandaloneBeanTest. The Output tab shows the progress of the test and the output log.